It was supposed to be just another quiet Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, another judge nominated by the Biden administration, another routine confirmation session. But things took a sharp turn when Senator John Kennedy, the ever-outspoken Republican from Louisiana, opened the folder in front of him. Inside were printed tweets, op-eds, academic lectures, none of which painted a flattering picture of the judge seated across from him. The nominee. Dr. Marissa Cartwright was a Harvard-educated law professor with a long history of liberal legal commentary. She had been nominated to serve on the federal bench in the Eastern District. By all accounts, she was academically qualified. But there was one thing Kennedy couldn't ignore. In a 2019 lecture at a university panel, Cartwright had reportedly referred to certain Christian doctrines as ideologically extreme, comparing them to cultural fundamentalism that impedes legal progress. That statement might have flown under the radar years ago. But in today's polarized political climate, it had all the makings of a bombshell. Kennedy leaned forward and tapped his finger on the microphone. "Professor Cartwright," he said, drawling in his trademark Southern tone, "I want to ask you about something you said, something that concerns me deeply." The room fell into a hush. "I have here a transcript," Kennedy continued, holding up the paper. "You said, quote, 'Evangelical Christianity in modern America serves as a legal roadblock to civil advancement, akin to cultural fundamentalism.'" He paused. "Did you say that?" Cartwright's face stiffened. She adjusted her glasses and glanced toward the Democratic members of the committee. "Senator, I believe that quote has been taken somewhat out of context." Kennedy didn't let her finish. "Oh no, ma'am. I don't need context when the words are that clear. You said evangelical Christianity is a roadblock? A fundamentalist movement?" The murmurs began first from the press row, then from the Republican bench. Senator Josh Hawley leaned back, arms crossed, clearly relishing the direction things were heading. Across the aisle, Senator Durbin looked visibly uneasy. Cartwright tried to interject, saying her comments were academic in nature and not meant as a blanket indictment of any faith. But Kennedy was on a roll. "You want to be a federal judge?" he said. "That means fairness. That means impartiality. But here you are labeling tens of millions of Americans as some kind of threat." Then came the hammer line. "I got news for you. Professor, you can't be impartial on the bench if you already think half the country is backward." That moment went viral within minutes. Clips of Kennedy's confrontation spread like wildfire on X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Hashtags like hashtag Kennedy Grills Cartwright and hashtag War on Faith exploded across social media. Outside the chamber, Christian groups immediately weighed in. The Family Council issued a press release condemning the nomination. Catholic bishop from Texas called Cartwright's comments deeply offensive. Evangelical pastors circulated the clip during their Sunday sermons, using Kennedy's words as a rallying cry, "Too many conservatives." This wasn't just about one judge. It was about what they saw as a broader cultural war. They believed the Biden administration was nominating people who held deep-seated biases against traditional religion. And Kennedy, as always, had become their most visible warrior. But this was just the beginning. Because what came next? Kennedy uncovered next would make those opening remarks look tame. If Senator Kennedy's first strike had rocked the room, his second was about to send shockwaves through the entire hearing. After exposing Judge Cartwright's inflammatory comments, from 2019, Kennedy didn't stop. He shuffled through his folder again, this time, slower, more deliberately. Then, he pulled out a new sheet, glanced at it, and leaned into the microphone with the same calm intensity that made people lean in or look away. "Professor Cartwright," he said, "in addition to your remarks about evangelicals, you also wrote in an academic law journal in 2020 that the Christian legal ethic is incompatible with progressive justice. Do you recall writing that?" A hush blanketed the room once again. Cartwright blinked. "Senator," that article explored, "conflicts between certain religious doctrines and evolving interpretations of civil rights law." Kennedy cut in, his voice sharp but controlled. "You said it was incompatible. That ain't academic lingo. It's a verdict." Ooh. The phrase hung in the air. He turned the paper around and displayed it for the cameras. You wrote, "The Christian legal ethic must be restructured, or marginalized if legal systems are to evolve toward equity." I didn't write that. You did? This time, gasps could be heard, not just from spectators, but even among a few senators. Senator Lindsey Graham leaned in, whispering something to Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Booker raised his eyebrows, visibly caught off guard. It even? The nominee seemed momentarily speechless. Kennedy wasn't done. "I come from Louisiana, ma'am," he said, "where church isn't just a building, it's the backbone of the community. Folks there don't see their faith as an obstacle. They see it as a compass." He paused for a moment, letting the contrast linger. "And you want to sit on a federal bench, interpreting the Constitution, when you've already prejudged an entire belief system? That's a problem." Cartwright attempted a defense. "Senator Kennedy, I've spent my career defending civil liberties and advocating for inclusion. My writings reflect scholarly exploration, not judicial prejudice." Kennedy smiled just slightly. "You ever heard the phrase, 'What's in the well comes up in the bucket'?" The committee chuckled nervously. Kennedy leaned back. "You don't write that kind of stuff unless that's what's in your heart." Social media lit up once. More conservative commentators began quoting Kennedy's metaphor about the well and the bucket. Fox News ran a headline within minutes. "Kennedy calls out anti-Christian bias in Biden judge." Faith-based news outlets followed suit, issuing op-eds and editorials decrying what they saw as a growing hostility toward religion in the legal system. Meanwhile, progressive outlets rushed to defend Cartwright, accusing Kennedy of grandstanding and mischaracterizing academic writings, but behind the theatrics. The heart of the issue was dead serious. Kennedy wasn't just challenging a nominee, he was questioning whether modern judicial philosophy had become so entangled with ideology that it no longer made space for traditional faith. It wasn't about political partisanship anymore. It was about something deeper. Whether someone who viewed Christianity as a threat to progress could be trusted to judge those who lived by it. And the more Kennedy spoke, the more that question echoed across the country. But things were about to get even more intense, because what Kennedy revealed next, that would change the course of the confirmation and perhaps her entire nomination. As the committee room settled from the heated exchange, most thought Senator Kennedy had played his strongest hand. But what no one expected was that he'd saved the most explosive piece for last. Kennedy sat calmly, waiting for silence to reclaim the chamber. Then he pulled out a manila envelope from under his binder and gently slid a folded document onto the desk in front of him. "Professor Cartwright," began, "are you familiar with this internal memo sent by your law department to the Department of Justice Advisory Board in 2021? Cartwright's composure cracked for the first time. I'm not sure which memo you're referring to." "Senator," she replied cautiously. Kennedy nodded slowly. "This one was leaked to my office 2 days ago. It's marked confidential. Internal use only. In it, you along with 2 of your colleagues recommend what you call judicial training modules to counteract, and I quote, Christian-centered ethical frameworks that interfere with progressive rulings." He flipped the document toward the cameras for all to see. The room went dead quiet. Even the Democrats on the panel began whispering among themselves. Aides leaned over their chairs. Porters in the back rows immediately began tapping on their phones. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another Kennedy soundbite. This was political dynamite. Cartwright stared at the paper, her lips parted but motionless. "Senator, I was not the lead author of that document," she said after a moment. "It was drafted by a departmental committee and reviewed by several scholars, but your signature's right here," Kennedy interrupted, pointing at the bottom of the page. "You signed it. You supported it. And now you want to be a judge who sits in judgment over religious Americans." He leaned in again, voice calm but razor sharp. "Let me ask you something directly, Professor. Do you believe Christians, people of sincere traditional faith, are a threat to your idea of justice?" Cartwright was visibly rattled now. "Of course not. I believe all people deserve equal treatment under the law, regardless of their faith. But you just recommended training to re-educate judges who have those beliefs." Kennedy shot back. "That sounds like ideological cleansing, not equality." Once again, social media detonated. This time, it wasn't just pundits and commentators, it was average Americans. Pastors, moms, veterans, and teachers, all reposting the memo, tagging their senators, and demanding answers. The hashtag judicial purge started trending. Conservative leaders called it a quiet war on religion in the judiciary. Within hours, Kennedy's confrontation was being played on cable news loops across the country. What Kennedy just exposed, one host said, isn't just bias, it's a plan to shape the court system in a way that excludes faith from the legal conversation. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership scrambled behind the scenes. What had started as a standard confirmation was now a full-blown media and political crisis. Senator Dick Durbin attempted to reclaim control of the hearing. Let's remember, he said that academic memos do not represent formal judicial positions. We must be careful not to equate scholarly debate with judicial intent. But Kennedy wasn't buying it. You can't just separate the mind from the man or the bench. From the beliefs, he said flatly, because when you sit behind that gavel, what you think about the people before you will matter. By the end of the hearing, the atmosphere was tense, nearly electric. Cartwright looked worn, clearly aware that her nomination was no longer a smooth ride. It was now a national controversy. And as Kennedy closed his folder, he delivered one final warning. I've got no problem with scholars. But when scholars want to become judges, they better be ready to defend every word they've written, especially when those words target the faithful. He stood up and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a stunned committee, a shaken nominee, and a media firestorm. The morning after the hearing, Washington was anything but calm. The political aftershocks from Senator Kennedy's grilling of Judge Cartwright rippled across Capitol Hill like a thunderclap. Cable news networks led with the story. CNN ran it with cautious language. Kennedy challenges judge on religious remarks. Fox News was far more direct. Kennedy exposes Biden's anti-Christian nominee. Meanwhile, social media platforms exploded with outrage, defense, satire, and everything in between. The memo Kennedy revealed became the central point of controversy. For conservative groups, it was proof that the Biden administration was quietly encouraging ideological filtering in the judiciary. For progressives, it was just another manufactured scandal designed to derail a qualified nominee. But in private, even Democratic senators were panicking. Senator Chris Coons reportedly told a staffer his nomination just got radioactive. Senator Joe Manchin, the moderate Democrat from West Virginia, was said to be deeply uncomfortable with the memo and Cartwright's past remarks. Behind closed doors, the White House was scrambling. Damage control meetings ran late into the night. Officials debated whether to defend Cartwright or quietly pull the nomination to avoid further embarrassment. Meanwhile, Kennedy went on a media tour on Fox's Hannity. He doubled down. I'm not going to apologize for calling out bigotry, especially when it's dressed up in academic robes, on Newsmax. He was even sharper. You don't get to call Christians a problem and then ask the Senate for a lifetime appointment. He framed it not as a political maneuver, but as a moral stand. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats, he said. It's about whether faith has a place in America's courts or whether it gets pushed out by judges who think religion is outdated. Churches across the country played Kennedy's hearing clip during services. Conservative talk. Radio turned him into a folk hero. At a town hall in Mississippi, one local pastor said, Kennedy didn't just defend Christianity, he defended the Constitution. Backlash also sparked a response from religious leaders outside the conservative fold. Reverend Al Sharpton warned on MSNBC, we have to be careful not to turn every academic comment into a witch hunt. But faith is sacred, and if nominees can't respect that, they shouldn't be judges. But the real story was Judge Cartwright. Her nomination went from assured to endangered within 24 hours. Editorial boards split. New York Times defended her, accusing Kennedy of weaponizing religion, while the Wall Street Journal published a brutal piece titled Hostile to the Faithful and Fit for the Bench. Cartwright herself issued a statement the next day, trying to clean up the mess. I deeply respect all faith traditions, including Christianity. My academic writings were intended to challenge legal frameworks, not people of faith. Regret. if my words were interpreted as hostile. But it was too late. The damage was done, and Kennedy knew it. He released a follow-up statement of his own. Apologies are easy. Beliefs are hard to change. If someone has spent their entire career discrediting Christian principles, they should not be surprised when they're asked to explain themselves under oath. The Judiciary Committee soon faced calls to delay the confirmation vote. Several senators requested more time to review the memo. Polls showed that public support for Cartwright's confirmation had dropped sharply and quietly. The Biden administration began looking at alternative nominees just in case. What had started as a routine hearing had now become a national referendum on faith, bias, and who deserves to wear the robe of justice. But Kennedy wasn't done yet, because in the final chapter of this drama, he'd deliver one last move, one so decisive, so public, it would force everyone to take a side. 3 days after the now infamous hearing, all eyes returned to Capitol Hill. The Judiciary Committee was set to reconvene. But no one expected what Senator John Kennedy was about to do next. The hearing room was packed with reporters. Cameras were everywhere. Protesters and supporters filled the halls outside, some chanting in defense of Judge Cartwright, others demanding her withdrawal. Kennedy walked in late. Not flustered, not in a hurry. Just calm, measured, and carrying a thick binder under his arm. No aides, no notes, just him and the folder. When it was his turn to speak, didn't waste time. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy began before this. Committee moves forward with a vote. I think the American people deserve one final truth. The room went quiet. He opened the binder, slowly flipped a few pages, and then held one up high. This, he said, is a syllabus from Professor Cartwright's 2022 legal ethics course. It was sent to me by one of her former students. You'll notice Unit 5 titled Faith-Based Reasoning and Judicial Obstruction. He paused and looked directly at the nominee. Professor Cartwright, care to explain why you taught your students that religiously motivated legal opinions inherently conflict with constitutional equity? Because that's what it says here. Cartwright opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew the document was real. Kennedy continued. You didn't just say Christians were a roadblock. You didn't just sign a memo asking for ideological re-education. You taught future lawyers that people of faith can't be trusted to interpret the law fairly. Then, turning toward the committee, you want to vote on this nomination? Fine. But let it be known that we would be confirming someone who thinks religious Americans are, by default, less qualified to interpret the Constitution. That's not progress. That's prejudice. A wave of murmurs spread. Senator Manchin shook his head. Senator Feinstein leaned forward, whispering to her staff. Even Chairman Durbin looked visibly shaken, and then Kennedy made his final move. Motion that this committee postpone the vote indefinitely pending further investigation into Professor Cartwright's writings and classroom materials. The room erupted. Some applauded, others protested. But Kennedy wasn't interested in the noise. This wasn't grandstanding anymore. This was checkmate. Later that evening, after intense internal discussions, the White House announced that Judge Cartwright had respectfully requested her nomination be withdrawn to avoid distracting from the administration's judicial priorities. It was a clean retreat, but everyone knew what had really happened. Kennedy had cornered a nominee with her own words, exposed an undercurrent of hostility toward faith in elite academic circles, and reminded the entire country that religious belief, no matter how unfashionable in some places, was still protected by the Constitution. In a follow-up interview on national radio, Kennedy said simply, I don't hate academics. Hate liberals. I just believe in fairness. If you want to wear the robe, you better be able to judge everyone, not just the people who agree with you. The moment solidified his reputation not just as a skilled interrogator, but as a guardian of values many felt were under siege. And as the headlines faded and the committee moved on to its next case, one thing was clear. John Kennedy didn't just scorch a nominee. Sparked a conversation that the country could no longer ignore.